Hello, and welcome to another video. Today, I will be finalizing the deck list for a rat-themed commander deck. The very beginnings of this deck made an appearance in a previous video where I was sorting through a stack of cards for EDH, which is also where I found the partially built Agnes the Dragon Slash deck that I finished building in a video a couple months ago. So this will be similar to that video. I've got a Moxfield page here that I've populated with cards that I'm considering for the rat deck. And we'll just be going through and refining down to the final 100 card deck list. For some background about why I wanted to build this deck, I've had the idea for a mono black rat deck for quite some time. I started thinking about it seriously when Wilds of Eldraine came out, because we got some interesting new rat cards with that set. And in the recent months, I was excited to see that rats were going to be one of the archetypes in Bloomburrow. So now that Bloomburrow is here, I think it's a great time to try and get this deck built. The inspiration behind wanting to build a rat-themed deck comes from the very beginning of my Magic journey. The first deck that I remember playing that I really felt connected with was the Mono Black Devotion deck from way back in Return to Ravnica Theros Standard. I don't remember my exact deck list, but I know it was very similar to this one, with Packrat and Nightveil Spectre, Desecration Demon, Gary, Lifebane Zombie, Mutavault. I thought this deck was so much fun to play, and I especially loved playing Packrat, where every card you draw can become a new rat that grows the entire swarm. I also really loved having the Grey Merchant hit the board and drain my opponent, and then being able to whip him back from the graveyard later. So I really wanted to have a commander deck that could approximate that experience for me. Having Packrat in here is an absolute must. And I want to have other rats that behave similarly, where their power increases based on the number of rats I control. That said, I am purposely choosing not to have multiple copies of cards, like Rat Colony and Relentless Rats. For me, I would just like to adhere to the singleton format, and even though these cards are allowed to have multiple copies, it's just a personal choice I'm making to limit it down to just one. So yeah. For this deck's commander, I've selected Karumonix the Rat King. He is a 3-mana 3/3 Phyrexian rat with Toxic 1 that gives other rats Toxic. When he enters the battlefield, you look at the top 5 cards of your library and reveal any number of rats. Put them into your hand, and the rest on the bottom of your library. I thought that this would be a really great commander because he goes and finds other rats for you when you play him. I like the Toxic as an alternative win con, although I'm not focusing heavily on poison in this deck. There are some other rats that deal infect damage on their own, and a little bit of proliferate if we end up keeping that in. But yeah, poison isn't really something that I'm going out of my way to dedicate resources to, although I think it'll happen as a result of some other things that we have going on here. For example, ninjutsu is a theme that we often see in rats. So many of our rats are evasive and can be given different types of evasion, which creates opportunities for those ninjutsu abilities. And that evasion will probably result in us being able to get through some infect damage as well. But my main goal for the deck is to try and make a lot of huge rat creatures and creature tokens, then use that evasion to try and get through, or clear out opponents' creatures with one-sided wrath effects, and if all else fails, fall back on corrupt type effects to try and drain opponents out of the game. As it stands, we've got 123 cards in the deck, and we'll need to cut 23 of them. So let's start going through the deck and see what we've got. I have a feeling that we can probably cut down a decent amount of the creatures in here. I think rats overall aren't very powerful on their own, and a lot of them just want opponents to discard cards or exile cards from their graveyards, which is fine. But I think we can probably cut down on some of the less impactful versions of those. So, yeah. As it stands now, there are 44 creatures in the deck. So I think we definitely have room to shave this down a bit. Alright, so we've already covered Karumonix, which is our commander. And then I've got a single Planeswalker in here right now. Liliana of the Dark Realms I thought looked really useful for a mono-black deck. It is some ramp and some removal, or it can pump up one of our creatures. So I thought this looked pretty good all around. Moving on to the creatures. Our first one is Ashcoat of the Shadow Swarm. This is actually the most expensive card in the entire deck. So if we were going for a more budget build, then I think this would be a really easy cut to make. I think it's really powerful, but it's not necessarily instrumental to how the deck functions, so we could do without, but for now I would like to keep it in. So whenever this creature attacks or blocks, other rats you control get +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the number of rats you control. And at the beginning of your end step, there is the option to mill 4 cards and return up to 2 rat creatures from your graveyard to your hand. So certainly useful and is good for feeding into its own ability. Ayara, First of Locked Thwain, is one of the few non-rat creatures that we have. She drains each opponent every time you play a black creature, and then you can sacrifice a black creature to draw a card. So I thought this would be good with the amount of rats and rat tokens that we would be creating. I would maybe consider cutting this, but I like that it enables you to use your rats to draw cards. I think I'll keep it in for now. And we know that with Ashcoat, those rats could potentially be coming back out of the graveyard, so they aren't necessarily gone permanently. And that also goes for discarding cards to pack rat and things like that. So I think we've got some decent synergy going on here that I don't really want to disrupt. Blight Belly Rat is just a 2/2 toxic 1 rat that proliferates when it dies. So I think that's good to keep in for the poison sub-theme that we have going on. And as we saw with Ayara, we can certainly force this to die if we want it to. Burglar Rat is a 1/1 rat that has each opponent discard a card when it enters the battlefield. So this is one that we would hope to be able to cast multiple times, or be able to return it straight to the battlefield. I'll keep it in for now, but as a 1/1 that doesn't do much else, it's not super enticing. Chittering Witch is also not a rat, but she does create rat tokens, and then you can sacrifice any creature to give another creature -2/-2 until end of turn. I like that she doesn't tap for that ability, so you can repeat it as many times as you want to sacrifice creatures and pay mana into this ability. So I think I'll keep this one in. Cryptghast is a 2/2 spirit that basically functions like a mana flare for your swamps, and also has Extort, which allows us to drain each time we cast a black spell, so thought that would be fitting for a mono black deck as well. Crypt Rats is a 3-mana 1/1 rat that we can pay X black mana into to deal X damage to each creature and each player. So this isn't great for maintaining a lot of creatures on our end, but might be good for booting someone out of the game. Gnawing Vermin is a 1-mana 1/1 rat. When it enters the battlefield, target player mills 2 cards. And then when he dies, target creature you don't control gets -1/-1 until end of turn. I could see this one being useful. We could even target ourselves if we wanted to try and get rats into the graveyard. But overall, I don't think it's that important. So I think I'd be okay cutting this one. Grey Merchant of Asphodel is definitely staying in. It is half the reason why I even built the deck, so not really willing to negotiate on this one. Ichor Rats is a 3-mana 2/1 rat with Infect, and when it enters the battlefield, each player gets a poison counter. So this one I would like to keep in as part of that poison theme. And again, it is a really good target for trying to cast multiple times or return from the graveyard. Inkai's Servant of Oni is a 6-mana 5/4 rat with ninjutsu. Whenever he deals combat damage to a player, you may put target card from that player's graveyard onto the battlefield under your control, and it can regenerate. So I thought this one looked really fun for jumping in and messing with an opponent's graveyard. Insatiable Frugivore is a 4-mana 2/4 rat berserker. When he enters, create a food token, and then you can exile 3 cards from your graveyard to make another. For 4 mana and sacrifice X foods, creatures you control get +X/+0 and gain menace until end of turn. What mostly appealed to me about this one is giving your entire team menace. I don't know how much opportunity we have to create food in this deck, so the additional power is probably not going to be that much. Lord Skitter Sewer King is a 3-mana 3/3 rat noble. Whenever another rat enters the battlefield under your control, exile up to one target card from an opponent's graveyard. And at the beginning of combat on your turn, you get a 1/1 rat that can't block. So I mostly like that this one creates rats every time you go to combat. It is kind of working against Ink Eyes, I think, but it does say it's up to one target creature, so you don't have to exile anything. But this could definitely be useful for getting rid of flashback or disrupting threshold or anything like that. Lord Skitter's Butcher is a 3-mana 2/3 rat that has 3 different modes when he enters the battlefield. And I think each of them are decently applicable, so seemed like a pretty versatile creature to have. Marrow-Gnawer is a 5-mana 2/3 rat that gives all rats fear, meaning they can only be blocked by artifact creatures or other black creatures. You can tap it to sacrifice a rat and create X 1/1 black rat creature tokens, where X is the number of rats you control. So I hope that this one can get out of hand very quickly. That ability is also instant speed, so any of our rats that get additional power from the number of rats you control can effectively double in size from this as long as you can tap Marrow-Gnawer and have a rat to sacrifice. So I think this creature looks great. Nashi, Moonsage's Scion, is a 3-mana 3/2 rat with ninjutsu for 4. When he deals combat damage to a player, you exile the top card of each player's library, and you can play one of those until end of turn by paying life instead of paying mana for it. So I thought this looked really fun and interesting to play with. Nezumi Informant is a 2-mana 1/1 rat that has each opponent discard a card when it enters the battlefield. So basically the same thing as Burglar Rat, and maybe something we could shave down on if we want. Nezumi Prowler is a 2-mana 3/1 with ninjutsu for 2. When it enters the battlefield, target creature we control gets Death Touch and Lifelink until end of turn. Not wildly good, but might allow us to trade up in combat or something like that. Ogre Slumlord is a 5-mana 3/3 Ogre Rogue. Whenever another non-token creature dies, we create a 1/1 rat, and rats we control have Death Touch. So really good for creating tokens. Old Flitterfang is a 5-mana 3/4 rat fairy with flying. At the beginning of each end step, if a creature died, then we create a food, and we can pay 3 and sacrifice another creature or a food to give this +2/+2. Old Flitterfang is probably the only creature that we have with flying, I would imagine. So a little bit of evasion for assisting with ninjutsu. I don't feel too strongly about this card, but I do like that it creates food. Packrat we've discussed is another non-negotiable for me. It is a 2-mana star rat whose power and toughness are each equal to the number of rats you control, and then for 3 mana and discard a card, you create a token copy of Pack Rat. So gets very out of hand very quickly, as long as you have cards to continue discarding to it or can create a lot of rats. So this one is for sure staying in. Persistent Marsh Stalker gets +1/+0 for each other rat you control. So it is going to have a very large power, but its toughness is still going to be only 1. But the good news is it can get itself back from the graveyard, so might still be worth playing, I think. Pestilence Rats is a 3-mana star 3, whose power is equal to the total number of other rats. So also includes your opponent's rats if they have any. A little less flimsy than Persistent Marsh Stalker at 3 toughness, but probably runs into the same problem. Think I'll keep this one in for now because of the power potential, but it isn't that strong, I don't think. Piper of the Swarm is a 2-mana 1/3 human warlock that gives your rats menace. It creates rat tokens, and it can even steal an opponent's creature if you want, so thought this one would be fun to keep in. Rancid Rats is a Skulk Death Touch 1/1. Thought it might be good evasion for that ninjutsu or getting through poison damage. Rat Colony is a 2-mana 2/1 rat that gets +1/+0 for each other rat you control. Again runs into the problem of not improving any toughness, but I will run with it anyway. And as we talked about in the beginning, I'm ignoring the ability to have any number of rat colonies. Rat Catcher is a 6-mana 4/4 ogre rogue with fear, and tutors up a rat for your hand at the beginning of your upkeep, so I really like this one. Ravenous Rats is a 2-mana 1/1 that makes an opponent discard a card. This one only targets one opponent rather than having each opponent do it. So compared to Nezumi Informant and Burglar Rat, I think we're good to just cut this one. Rotting Rats is another 1/1 that has each player discard a card, but this one has Unearth. So the drawback is that this one is for each player to discard a card, whereas the other ones that we looked at are just each opponent. I'm going to cut this one, I think. Unearth I don't think is a huge upside for me, knowing that we have ways of returning rats to the battlefield. So I don't really think this one is necessary. Septic Rats is another infect rat, and gets slightly bigger if your opponent is poisoned already. Sinuous Vermin is a 2/2 that can become a 5/5 menace. I don't know that it's really worth it to pay into monstrosity. I guess we do have some proliferate in here, so we could continue adding +1/+1 counters to it, but I'm pretty underwhelmed with this one, I think. Skull Snatcher is a 2-mana 2/1 with ninjutsu for a single black that exiles up to 2 cards from a player's library if it deals combat damage to them. It's fine, I guess. I think I'm gonna cut it though. we've still got 19 cards to cut, and I think I'm fine getting rid of this one. Species Specialist draws us a card every time a rat dies. So I definitely want to keep this one in here. Stronghold Rats is a 2/1 rat with Shadow, and each player discards a card whenever it deals combat damage to a player. Highly unlikely that it would get blocked under normal circumstances. Swarm of Rats is another star one, with power equal to the number of rats we control. Tangled Colony is a 3/2 rat that can't block, but creates X rat tokens, depending on how much damage it took when it died, so could create a lot of rats potentially, but probably like 2 or something. This one is a 2/2 rat with ninjutsu that destroys a non-black creature when it deals combat damage, so I think that one looks pretty good. Twisted Sewer Witch is a human warlock, but creates a rat token when she enters, and then puts a Wicked Roll token onto every rat you control, which makes them bigger but also represents a lot of potential damage, because those roll tokens deal 1 damage whenever that creature dies. So I think this looks really cool to play. Typhoid Rats is just a 1/1 rat with Death Touch, so that's not too exciting, I don't think. Valley Rotcaller is a 2-mana 1/3 squirrel warlock with Menace. Whenever it attacks, each opponent loses X life and you gain X life, where X is the number of other squirrels, bats, lizards, or rats you control. So even if this needs to attack unprofitably, you could at least have a really big life swing depending on how many rats you control. Voracious Vermin is a 2/1 rat that creates another rat token when it enters the battlefield, and then whenever another creature you control dies, you put a +1/+1 counter on Voracious Vermin. So that's a nice benefit. Since we have some creature sacrifice in here, plus I'm sure we're going to lose creatures in combat, so I think I'm okay leaving this one in here for now. And our final creature is Wave of Rats. It's a 4-mana 4/2 trample. Its Blitz ability lets us draw a card when it dies, but I don't know that I'm super sold on it. Moving on to the sorceries. We've got Corrupt, which deals damage to any target equal to the number of swamps we control, and then we gain that much life. So hopefully using this to take down a really large creature, or possibly taking out an opponent. Damnation I would like to keep as a board wipe. Demonic Tutor we can use to search up any card, and I would consider a staple in any black commander deck. So, would like to keep that one in here. Diabolic Intent is also a tutor, with the added expense of sacrificing a creature, but I think we'll have plenty of rats to feed into this. Drown an Ichor I could take or leave, I think. I intended for this to be a removal spell, and I liked that it had Proliferate, but there are certainly plenty of creatures that this won't be able to get. and I don't know that having proliferate is really a focus of mine. So yeah, I think I might cut this. Fell is just 1 and a black to destroy target creature, so I think I'm perfectly fine leaving this one in. Haunting Voyage lets us return rats from the graveyard directly to the battlefield, so I'd love to keep this one in. Kindred Dominance is a board wipe that allows us to spare the rats. If any opponents have rats or changelings, then those would make it through as well, but hopefully for the most part, this is just a one-sided board wipe. Patriarch's Bidding is another one that allows us to return rats from the graveyard to the battlefield. Our opponents get to participate in this one as well, and could potentially go poorly for us if there are other kindred decks at the table, but I still think it could create some fun situations, so I think I'll leave this one in. Plague of Vermin gives each player the chance to pay life into creating 1/1 rat tokens for themselves. This kind of works against the Kindred Dominance, but hopefully we would still be the player with the overwhelming board presence after that. And things like Corrupt hopefully mean that we have plenty of life at our disposal to pay into Plague of Vermin, and allows us to use our life as more of a resource. So I'd like to keep this one in. Spread the Sickness destroys a creature and proliferates, so it is an upgrade from the Drown and Ichor that we got rid of, but it does cost significantly more to cast. I think I'll leave this one in as unconditional creature removal, but we might want to revisit this one later on. Swarmyard Massacre is a pseudo one-sided board wipe. It is from Bloomburrow, so we've got a number of creature types that this will not interact with. But for 5 mana you get to create 2 squirrel tokens, and then each creature that isn't an insect, rat, spider, or squirrel gets -1/-1 until end of turn for each creature we control that is one of those types. So with a lot of rats, we should be able to get rid of a bunch of creatures on the board. Our opponents may certainly have these creature types that wouldn't be affected by this, but it is something that I'd at least like to experiment with and try out. And then Unearth returns a creature card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, and cycles for 2. So this should get back a decent amount of creatures from our graveyard. Maybe not the most impactful ones, but things like Ichor rats can put poison counters on players. We can have our opponents discard cards and things like that, so I think this is probably alright. Moving on to our instants. Consuming Corruption is similar to Corrupt, but can only target creatures or planeswalkers. But I think I'm fine with that. Deadly Rollick costs 4 mana, or if we have Karumonix out, then it's free, and it exiles a creature, so I would like to keep this one in. Defile is a single black to give a creature -1/-1 for each swamp we control, so kind of scales up or down depending on how late in the game you play it. Fell the Profane destroys a creature or planeswalker, or is alternatively a land. I appreciate that the land is there, though I think we would really want to avoid having to play it as a land if we can help it, but doesn't seem bad to at least have it. Go for the Throat destroys target non-artifact creature for 1 and a black. I put this in pretty much every black commander deck, so I think I'm good keeping this one in. Hero's Downfall is 1 black to destroy target creature or planeswalker, so I want to keep that one in. Raise the Draugr is 1 and a black to return up to 2 target creatures from your graveyard to your hand, as long as they share a creature type. We do have some sorceries that allow us to return creature cards directly to the battlefield rather than your hand. So this one we may consider cutting, but I think I'll leave it in for now. Rad Out is a single black to give a creature -1/-1, and you create a rat token that can't block. I put this one in here because it's thematic, but I really don't think it's good enough to keep in, unfortunately. So let's get rid of this one. Tainted Strike is a single black to give a creature +1/+0 and infect until end of turn. I was kind of thinking that this might be good for some of the evasive rats to get through poison damage, but I don't really think we're going to need it with Karumonix. Kind of seems like it's not really adding anything, so I would be good getting rid of this, I think. And our last instant is Village Rites. It is a single black and sacrifice a creature to draw 2 cards. I don't really think we're going to need this one. We've got other ways of drawing cards, and I just don't think we're going to need it. Moving on to the artifacts. We have Bantu's Monument, which makes our black creature spells cost 1 less to cast. And whenever we cast a creature spell, each opponent loses 1 life and we gain 1 life. I think I would like to keep this one in for now. Caged Sun will give all of our black creatures +1/+1. And any of our lands that produce black mana will produce an additional 1. Coat of Arms. Each creature gets +1/+1 for each other creature on the battlefield that shares a creature type with it. This one goes for the entire battlefield, so it might be a bit dangerous, but I think it might be a lot of fun anyway, so I kind of want to keep this one in. Door of Destinies. We would be naming Rat. Whenever we cast a rat spell, we're going to put a charge counter on Door of Destinies, and then each rat we control gets +1/+1 for each charge counter on it. So I like this one and want to keep it in. Hall of Triumph will give all of our black creatures +1/+1. Herald's Horn will make our rats cost 1 mana less to cast. And at the beginning of our upkeep, we can look at the top card of our library. If it is a rat card, we can reveal it and put it into our hand. So I like that this one draws extra cards and allows us to make our rats cheaper. Icon of Ancestry is another one that will give our rats +1/+1, and then we can pay 3 and tap it to look at the top 3 cards of our library, reveal a rat creature from among them, and put it into our hand. So I've got a decent amount of these redundant effects that improve the power and toughness of rats. So I think I'm gonna cut Hall of Triumph because it doesn't do anything else like some of these other ones do. Jet Medallion makes all of our black spells cost 1 less to cast. Nyx Lotus is going to produce black mana equal to our devotion to black. Obelisk of Verd is going to give our rats +2/+2. It costs 6 mana, but it has Convoke. Similar to the Hall of Triumph, though, it doesn't really do anything else, and I think we have a good amount of redundancy with this effect, so I'm going to cut this one. Patchwork Banner gives our rats +1/+1 and also taps to add a mana of any color. I think this would probably be more useful if we weren't in a monocolored deck. I think I'm unfortunately going to leave this one behind as well. Soul Ring I'm going to leave in. Swiftfoot Boots gives equipped creature hexproof and haste, so I'm going to leave that one in. I am in the process, however, of going through all of my decks and updating the Swiftfoot Boots to the roller skate one from Fallout, because I absolutely love it. My other hobby outside of Magic is roller skating, so I really feel connected to this art, and I'll make sure we're updated here as well. Vanquisher's Banner gives our rats +1/+1, and whenever we cast a rat, we draw a card. So this one I do want to keep in. And then Whip of Erebos is definitely a holdover from that mono black standard deck that I used to play, that I kind of wanted to emulate with this commander deck. So it gives all of our creatures lifelink, and at sorcery speed we can return a creature from our graveyard to the battlefield and then exile it at the beginning of the next end step. You know, this is for doing things like whipping Gary back from the graveyard. Anything really that has an enter the battlefield ability that you would want to repeat. But it is just for the one turn and then it gets exiled. So I think we just have better ways of doing this that are more permanent. Although this one is an artifact and will stick around, so you could essentially do this every turn until you run out of creatures in your graveyard. But I don't think I'm really sold on this one, unfortunately, so I will go ahead and cut it. So moving on to the enchantments, we've got Dictate of Erebos. It is 3 black for an enchantment with flash. Whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent sacrifices a creature. It is kind of a mean card, but it does get around creatures with indestructible, and it is just an enchantment, and I feel like those are fairly easy to get rid of in Commander. So I'm not really worried about having this and it being too oppressive. Lord Skitter's Blessing is of course thematic. It is 1 and a black for basically Phyrexian Arena as long as you control an enchanted creature. And it creates a wicked enchantment for you. We don't really have much for auras in here aside from the Wicked Roll tokens, so this could be a bit flimsy, but I think I want to keep it in here anyway. Oversold Cemetery is 1 and a black. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you have 4 or more creature cards in your graveyard, you can return a creature card from your graveyard to your hand. I'm not super attached to this one, but I like that it represents kind of perpetually having access to the creatures in our graveyard, as long as our graveyard doesn't get exiled or something like that. So I'm fine with keeping this in for now. Phyrexian Arena. Oh, why did it default to the Phyrexian version? Anyway, it is 1 black. At the beginning of your upkeep, you draw a card and lose 1 life. So I do want to keep that one. Tribute to Hirobi is a saga. For chapters 1 and 2, each of your opponents get a 1/1 rat. And then it transforms into Echo of Death's Wail. It is a 3/3 spirit with flying and haste. When it enters, you gain control of all rat tokens, and whenever it attacks, you can sacrifice a creature to draw a card. So I thought this one might be interesting, especially with things like Plague of Vermin around, but I don't know that I'm totally sold on it. I like the creature on the back. I just don't know that it's really impactful enough. So I think I'm gonna cut this one. And I think I'm gonna get rid of Vampiric Rites as well. I just don't think we need it. Our last category is lands, and we can probably go through these pretty quickly. I think I'm good with the number of lands that we have. So Access Tunnel, it taps for colorless, or 3 and tap. Target creature with power 3 or less can't be blocked this turn. So I initially put this in here thinking that the rats would be fairly small creatures, but the idea is really that these rats are going to grow and grow the more that we play, and the more anthem effects that we have. So I don't know that this land is actually going to be that useful. Cabal Coffers is 2 tap to add black for each swamp you control. I want to keep this one in here. Cabal Stronghold does the same thing for 3 and tap, and otherwise taps to add colorless. Cavern of Souls is going to name rats. It will tap for a colorless, or tap for a black to cast a rat and make it uncounterable. Mudflat Village taps for colorless, or a black if we cast a creature spell, and for 1 and a black we can return a rat from our graveyard to our hand. Nykthos taps for colorless, or 2 and tap to add black mana equal to our devotion to black. Reliquary Tower taps for a colorless, and makes it so we have no maximum hand size. Rogue's Passage taps for a colorless, or 4 and tap to make a creature unblockable this turn. So this is just a better version of the access tunnel that we cut, and will allow us to put a rat of any size through it. We've got 24 swamps. Three Tree City is a new one from Bloomborough, kind of similar to Nykthos. It taps for a colorless, or 2 and tap to add black equal to the number of rats we control. Witch's Cottage is a swamp. It enters tapped unless we control 3 or more swamps. And if it enters untapped, we can put a creature card from our graveyard on top of our library. So we did cut 1 land, and I want to add 1 back in to replace it. I'm thinking that we should probably add in an Urborg, since we have so many lands that produce colorless. And we have a few cards that really care about the number of swamps we control. So I think it's a good idea to add in a land that'll make everything a swamp. Alright, so that is everything, and we've got 6 more cuts to make. I love Cryptghast. I'm not sure this is going to be entirely necessary. I think it is a nice to have, and I think it's good to slowly chip away at our opponent's life. But I think I will send this one off. I was interested in this one as a new rat from Bloomborough, but I don't love it, and I think we can do without. Do we really need Ruin Rat? It does have Death Touch going for it, which I appreciate, but I don't really think we need it. Maybe we don't need Spread the Sickness. Like I mentioned, the Proliferate isn't really a huge goal for me, so besides that, it's kind of just an inefficient removal spell. So I think I can get rid of it. I feel like maybe I should pick between Raise the Draugr and Oversold Cemetery. I appreciate that Raise the Draugr is instant speed, but Oversold Cemetery is repeatable and happens every one of your upkeeps, as long as you meet the condition. So maybe I'll get rid of Raise the Draugr. Maybe Septic Rats isn't that compelling. It does have Infect on its own, but Karumonix is going to give everything toxic, so I don't know that we need this. And that's 100. All right. So the deck is now complete, but I am curious to know your thoughts. Do you think this deck is missing anything or has too much of anything? Would you take it in a different direction? Have you ever played with a rat-themed deck? Whether the commander was Karumonix or something else? I would love to hear all about it. So as always, leave me your thoughts down in the comments, and let's chat about it. And if you enjoyed this video, I would so appreciate if you would hit that thumbs up button. And please consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. And I'll be back with new Magic the Gathering ASMR videos every Monday and Friday. Your support truly means the world to me. And as always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day.